"Mia, you brought me something special," whispered the 12-inch doll perched on the apartment's windowsill, its oversized ears twitching as it turned to face her. The creature's black button eyes reflected no light, and its smile revealed tiny white teeth that hadn't been there in the product photos. Before Mia could process what she'd heard, the doll hopped down from the sill with a wet thud and began walking toward her on stubby vinyl legs. Her grandmother's bankruptcy had forced this desperate trip to Prague, selling the family's antique jewelry collection to mysterious collectors who operated through encrypted messaging apps. The Labubu doll had been an impulse purchase from a street vendor near Wenceslas Square. A gift for her sister's daughter back home, something innocent to offset the darkness of her mission. Now the thing stood at her feet, reaching up with arms that moved too fluidly for hollow vinyl. "Touch me," it commanded in a voice like grinding plastic. "Pick me up, Mia Chen." She hadn't told anyone her surname. The booking confirmation showed only her first name, and she'd paid the vendor in cash, without exchanging words beyond pointing and nodding. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The jewelry won't save your family, but I can." The apartment's heating system clicked off with an echoing bang that reverberated through the walls. In the sudden silence, she heard the doll's feet pattering across the hardwood floor, circling her like a predator. Her laptop screen flickered and died despite showing full battery moments before. The streetlights outside dimmed one by one until only darkness pressed against the windows. "You've been running from the truth about your grandmother's debts," the doll said, now somehow behind her, though she hadn't seen it move. "The people she borrowed from aren't banks, Mia. They're something much older." She spun around but found empty air, her breath fogged in the suddenly frigid room. The doll's laughter echoed from multiple directions, the walls, the ceiling, inside her own head. When she reached for her phone to call someone, anyone, the screen displayed only static punctuated by brief flashes of images. Her grandmother's house, empty and dark, police tape across the front door, a newspaper headline she couldn't quite read. The time on her phone jumped forward 3 hours in an instant. According to the display, she'd been standing in the same spot from midnight until 3 in the morning, though she remembered only minutes passing. Her legs ached as if she'd been motionless for hours, and her throat felt raw from screaming, though she had no memory of making a sound. "The collectors your grandmother borrowed from have been in business for centuries." The doll's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "They don't lend money, Mia. They purchase souls, and debts pass to the eldest grandchild." The apartment door swung open on its own, revealing not the narrow hallway she'd walked through earlier, but a vast stone chamber lit by torches that cast no shadows. The smell of incense and something worse, decay, ancient and deep, drifted through the opening. Footsteps approached from the darkness beyond, measured and deliberate. "Your grandmother tried to warn you," the doll continued. "All those calls you ignored, all those letters you threw away unopened. She knew what was coming." Mia's memory flashed to her grandmother's increasingly frantic voicemails over the past months. The old woman had begged her to visit, claimed she needed to explain something important about the family history, about debts that weren't financial. Mia had dismissed it all as dementia, the confused ramblings of a mind slipping away. Now she realized her grandmother had been trying to prepare her for this moment. The footsteps grew closer. She could see shapes moving in the torchlit chamber, tall figures in dark robes, their faces hidden but their intent unmistakable. They'd been waiting for her to arrive, waiting for the doll to complete the binding that would transfer her grandmother's obligation to her. Her grandmother had been an archivist at the university library for 40 years, specializing in medieval manuscripts and folklore. The knowledge she'd accumulated wasn't just academic, it was practical, defensive. Mia remembered childhood visits filled with strange lessons disguised as games. How to recognize protective symbols, how to break curses using specific words and actions, how to identify supernatural threats hiding in plain sight. The binding requires consent, she said aloud, suddenly understanding. That's why you need me to touch you. That's why you're trying to make me afraid enough to grab you for comfort. The doll's laughter stopped abruptly. Clever girl, but fear isn't the only way to gain consent. The chamber beyond the door began to fade, replaced by images of her sister's family, her brother-in-law losing his job, her niece in a hospital bed, medical bills stacking higher than their mortgage payments. The collectors had already begun their work, unraveling the lives of everyone Mia cared about. The doll offered a simple solution. One touch, one moment of contact, and her family's suffering would end. They'll die without the money you came here to earn, the doll said, but I can make it all disappear. Their debts, their pain, their fear. All you have to do is pick me up. Mia pulled out her phone and began recording, speaking clearly, despite her terror. My name is Mia Chen. I'm in Prague at an Airbnb that shouldn't exist, being threatened by something that calls itself a Labubu doll. If something happens to me, know that I was trying to protect my family from supernatural collectors who prey on desperate people. The doll hissed and recoiled from the phone's light. Technology won't save you. Maybe not, Mia said, backing toward the window. But my grandmother left me more than debts. She left me knowledge. She began reciting words her grandmother had taught her, Latin phrases that had seemed like meaningless academic exercises at the time. The doll shrieked and writhed, its plastic surface bubbling and melting. The fake apartment around her shimmered and dissolved, revealing the truth. She was standing in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Prague, surrounded by the skeletal remains of previous victims. The collectors weren't supernatural entities. They were human predators who used folklore and fear to control their victims. The doll was a sophisticated puppet operated by hidden technology, designed to convince desperate people they were dealing with forces beyond their understanding. But their deception relied on ignorance, on victims who didn't recognize the difference between real supernatural threats and elaborate psychological manipulation. Mia smashed the doll against the concrete floor, revealing the complex electronics inside. Cameras and speakers, motion sensors and remote controls, all designed to create the illusion of supernatural activity. Her grandmother's real gift hadn't been preparing her for ancient curses. It had been teaching her to think critically, to question what seemed impossible, to look for rational explanations even in the face of terror. The warehouse lights flicked on, revealing figures in dark robes scrambling to escape through hidden exits. She disrupted their carefully choreographed performance, exposed their elaborate con game. Her phone had signal now, and she called the Prague police while documenting everything she could see. Later, sitting in a real hotel room while detectives took her statement, Mia understood that her grandmother's frantic messages hadn't been about supernatural deaths. They'd been warnings about human predators who targeted families in financial crisis, who researched their victims thoroughly and exploited their desperation with elaborate deceptions. The old woman had recognized the signs, had tried to prepare her granddaughter for an encounter she knew was coming. The antique jewelry Mia had brought to sell was real and valuable, enough to help her family through their crisis. But the true treasure her grandmother had left her was the ability to recognize deception, to fight back against those who would exploit fear and desperation for profit. The scars would remain, the memory of that warehouse, the knowledge that such predators existed and thrived on human suffering. But she was alive, her family was safe, and the collectors who had preyed on her grandmother would face justice. The nightmare was over, though Mia knew she would never again trust appearances completely, would always look closer when something seemed too convenient or too frightening to be real. Her grandmother's final lesson had been the most important. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are entirely human. 3 weeks later, Mia sat in her sister's kitchen in Portland, watching her niece play with a new toy, a legitimate Labubu doll purchased from an authorized retailer. The sight still made her stomach clench, but she forced herself to remain calm. The real doll was harmless, just vinyl and stuffing, nothing like the sophisticated puppet the Prague predators had used. "You're staring again," her sister Emma said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "Want to talk about what really happened over there?" Mia had told her family the condensed version. She discovered their grandmother had been targeted by elaborate con artists who preyed on elderly people in debt. The Czech police had praised her quick thinking in exposing an international fraud ring that had operated for decades. What she hadn't shared were the sleepless nights, the way she now checked every shadow twice, the persistent feeling that the network of predators might extend further than anyone realized. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Novak in Prague. 3 more warehouses discovered, victims from 12 countries. Your evidence crucial for prosecutions. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated operation spanning multiple countries. The predators researched their targets meticulously, learning family histories, financial situations, and personal vulnerabilities. They used that information to create personalized psychological horror experiences designed to break down rational thinking and create dependency on their supernatural solutions. But something still bothered Mia. The doll in Prague had known things the police investigation couldn't fully explain. Specific details about her grandmother's childhood, family secrets that weren't recorded anywhere online. Either the predators' research capabilities were far more extensive than anyone realized, or there had been another source of information. Her phone rang. Unknown international number. "Don't answer," Emma said, noticing her hesitation. Mia declined the call, but it rang again immediately. Then again. On the 4th attempt, she answered, "Mia Chen." The voice was elderly, female, speaking accented English. "You destroyed our Prague operation." "Good," Mia said, gesturing for Emma to call the police. "I hope you all rot in prison. You misunderstand what you uncovered. The technology, the warehouse, the men in robes. Those were theater, yes. But the information we possessed about your family, the knowledge we shared through our little puppet, that came from a different source entirely. Mia's blood chilled. What are you talking about? Your grandmother was never our victim child. She was our informant. For 40 years, she fed us information about vulnerable families, people who came to the university library seeking help with folklore and curses. She identified the desperate ones, the believers, the ones who would pay anything for supernatural solutions to mundane problems. That's impossible. She tried to warn me. She warned you because she realized we intended to collect on her own family. 40 years of payments, and she thought she could simply stop cooperating when it became personal. But debts must be honored, Mia. Even informant debts. The line went dead. Mia stared at her phone, her mind racing. If the caller was telling the truth, then her grandmother's frantic warnings hadn't been about protecting her family from predators. They'd been desperate attempts to prepare her granddaughter for a reckoning the old woman knew was coming. Emma returned from making the call. Police are tracing the number, but they said international calls are difficult to track quickly. What did they say? Mia couldn't speak. She thought of her grandmother's extensive knowledge of folklore and supernatural threats, the way she'd always known exactly which stories would frighten people most effectively. Her academic expertise hadn't been defensive. It had been weaponized, used to identify and manipulate vulnerable people seeking help. Her laptop chimed with an incoming email from an address that was just random numbers and letters. The subject line read, "Your grandmother's real legacy." Against her better judgment, she opened it. The message contained a single attachment, a photograph of a handwritten ledger. The pages showed names, addresses, and detailed notes about psychological vulnerabilities. Her grandmother's careful handwriting filled every line, documenting decades of people who had sought help with supernatural problems. At the bottom of the visible page, in her grandmother's distinctive script, "Granddaughter Mia, university education, skeptical but curious about family history. Potential asset for US operations when financial pressure applied." Mia slammed the laptop closed, her hands shaking. Her grandmother hadn't been trying to protect her from the collectors. She'd been grooming her as a replacement, teaching her the skills needed to identify and manipulate desperate people. The Latin phrases, the folklore lessons, the critical thinking exercises, all of it designed to create the perfect inside agent for their operation. The doorbell rang. Through the kitchen window, Mia could see a delivery truck parked outside. Emma went to answer, while Mia remained frozen at the table, processing the implications of what she'd discovered. "Package for Mia Chen," she heard the delivery driver say. "From Prague." Emma returned carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. No return address, just Mia's name and her sister's address written in elegant handwriting she recognized immediately. Her grandmother's script, though the package was postmarked after the old woman's death. Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was another Labubu doll. This one looked identical to the puppet from the warehouse, down to the oversized ears and button eyes. But when Mia lifted it from the box, she felt the weight of real electronics inside. A folded note fell from the tissue paper. The Prague operation was just the beginning. Your grandmother's real work continues through you. We'll be in touch soon. The collectors. The doll's eyes began to glow with faint LED light. Its mouth moved slightly, and she heard the whisper of tiny speakers hidden inside the vinyl head. "Welcome to the family business, Mia." She dropped the doll and backed away from the table. But Emma had already seen too much. Her sister's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with the same terror Mia had felt in that fake Prague apartment. "What is that thing?" Emma whispered. Before Mia could answer, her phone buzzed with a new text message. "Your niece would make an excellent addition to our program. Such an imaginative child. We'll start her training soon." The collectors hadn't been stopped. They'd been studying her, learning from her resistance, adapting their methods. And now they wanted to continue the cycle through the next generation, using her family's trust in her as the perfect entry point for their psychological manipulation. The real horror wasn't that monsters existed. It was that they were patient, adaptive, and always recruiting.